Hello, everyone, and welcome back to your favorite podcast, Anna's Cozy Corner. Yay! Where we talk about the hottest books of the moment. Now, I know I'm a bit behind on the Glass Castle wagon, but I'm a strong believer of saving the best for last. I've been reading a lot of you guys' comments, and I know you guys have been wanting me to review a standalone book, especially after we finish the Twilight Saga. Well, I'm gonna get right into it. I don't want to bore any of you with my random yapping. I'm sure that by now you've noticed the weekly poster A. The title Poverty and Its Influence on People is a reference to one of the book's most prevalent themes, which is the struggle of individuals living in poverty and the impact it has on their lives. This theme can be connected to the ongoing discussions and movements surrounding income inequality and a person's control of their own vulnerable situation. So beyond simply talking about the book and its themes, I want to take you on a journey into the complex realities of poverty, resilience, and the quest for societal change. Imagine a world where the strength of the human spirit meets the harshness of the systematic barriers. Well, that's what Jeanette Wall's memoir, The Glass Castle, is all about. What I mean by this is that The Glass Castle presents a complex picture of poverty, showcasing both the resilience of the human spirit in the face of adversity and the systematic challenges that perpetuate these cycles of poverty that is very hard for people to get out of. And while the book emphasizes personal strength and determination, it also sheds a light on the limitations individuals face due to systematic issues beyond their control, such as the lack of social services. Something that I've always thought was an issue was the lack of psychological help offered to people living in poverty and trying to break cycles of poverty. Not only do governments lack the knowledge on how to handle poverty from an economical standpoint, for example, being able to afford food in the presence of affordable housing, but they also do not take into consideration the drastic mental issues and challenges these people acquire from the situations they're in. So having to work for endless hours and still not being able to afford basic needs for themselves and their families can lead people to gain this huge sense of responsibility and guilt from seeing their families suffer, which can lead them to have depression and face many other mental issues. This is why I think it's so important to actually care about people beyond an economical standpoint. And this is a little bit off topic, but I don't know if you guys know that I'm actually from Colombia, and one of Colombia's biggest problem is poverty. There's a lot of poverty, like in a lot of other third world countries. And growing up, I'd always see people in the streets begging for money and food, as well as people sleeping in their own cardboard boxes, much like the Walls kids, as Jeanette Walls mentions in page 52 of the book. Start quotation: instead of beds, we kids each slept in a big cardboard box, like the ones refrigerators get delivered in, end quote. Seeing these things growing up had like a huge impact on me, especially since my grandma would always bring me with her to give the poor families clothing and toys, and being able to read a book that described these experiences from a first-person perspective was fascinating and made the whole situation more human and easier to sympathize with, especially because Jeanette had to grow up in this environment and find her own battles in order to quite literally survive. So the Walls family, for most of their lives, lived in extreme poverty, constantly moving from place to place, struggling to make ends meet. The Walls children often go hungry, lack proper clothing, and endure challenging living conditions due to their parents' inability to maintain stable employment, provide a stable home environment, or act their age and role. And the Walls kids, like many other children in similar situations, had a lot of responsibility to take on from a very young age. I think one of the most outstanding examples of this is the fact that their mother, Rosemary, she was a teacher but refused to work as a teacher because she just did not like that career. And when she was forced to go into this environment where she had to teach and stuff like that, she would actually never really do anything. And it was her children who would prepare her lessons. Jeanette mentions going to her classroom every day after school to clean her chalkboard and dust her erasers, and Lori would grade tests and papers. And we also see Brian and Jeanette when they're in Welsh and there's like a very harsh winter. They had to go around town picking up leftover pieces of coal so they could keep their family warm. They all got jobs, all of the kids got jobs at a very young age. We hear Jeanette lying about her age, about being 17 when she was actually 13, in order to get a job at a jewelry box. Brian had a job. Jeanette also babysat. Lori had a job. Lori, also, we see this perspective, this responsibility that people in these situations have to come with. And I think you see it a lot in families. Like, this isn't the only case. Oftentimes, the oldest kid takes responsibility of the smaller ones. Not necessarily in every single poor family, but we see it more in these scenarios because parents have to go out and work and they do not have often the time to spend with the children. So the oldest one always takes the responsibility. And Lori becoming a quote-unquote parent at a young age and taking care of all her siblings was a huge responsibility that takes away from her formative years as a young child and growing up as a normal person. She even took Maureen when she moved to New York Maureen was 12 years old and Lori was early 20s. In many countries, like I previously mentioned, it's very normal to see young kids, and I'm talking 4, 5, 6 years old, working on the streets trying to sell anything they can in order to help their family. In the worst case, they would have to do like I previously mentioned, with their mom's job, trying to encourage her to actually work and like bring in the money. And the constant struggle that many kids, in this case the Walls, have and had to see growing up forced a lot of their formative years to be spent working and acting like adults rather than have a normal school and family life. And young people in these situations are taught to find quick answers from a very young age. They need to know how they will get their food of the day and how much it will cost them. A lot of people are forced to look through garbage in order to be able to find something to eat, something that Jeanette herself admits to have done during her family's lowest point in Welsh. Not only would she look through the trash for her food, but also some for her siblings. Another thing people living in poverty have to worry about is having a roof for their heads. And the Walls lived in trailer parks, even slept in the car where necessary. The houses they lived in were often run down and about to collapse. In Welsh, Brian's room ceiling even collapsed. And these major responsibilities people are forced to take prevent them from getting a proper education, which can lead them to go to university, maybe make some connections and get a job. There's this thing that the higher education you get, the most likely you are to get a job, a good paying job. And a lot of these people who live in poverty are not able to do this because instead they have to spend all their time either taking care of their family or having to work. And even making connections, they're not able to make these meaningful connections because everyone else around them is also in a similar position to them. So connections don't really help them get a lot of jobs. And this kind of situation forces them to stay in this cycle of poverty that their parents and previous generations were forced to stay in. So I think the vivid portrayal of the Wolves family's like nomadic life, and so way you could say it, in the constant struggle for basic necessities and the lack of access to a stable housing or education resonates deeply with the ongoing conversations about income inequality and especially like socioeconomic disparity in our society today. Some things that really brought me into the book and kind of like caught my attention were the resilience, determination, and the wanting to break a cycle of poverty. So resilience shines through the Wolves family's experience as they navigate extreme poverty and the challenges it brings. And despite enduring hunger, homelessness, and neglect from the parents, the children, so Jeanette and her siblings, display remarkable resilience. They find ways to survive, whether it's scrounging for food or relying on their creativity and resourcefulness to cope with their circumstances, their ability to adapt, persevere, and maintain hope in the face of adversity. Like, it's a great example of the resilience. And we hear about it from Jeanette's perspective, but this is a case for many other families who also have to live in poverty. They have to keep this resilience and they have to keep this will to want to keep going. The next thing that also caught a lot of my attention was the determination. I think determination is another central element in the book, and Jeanette in particular, I think she embodies determination as she strives for a better life beyond the confines of poverty. She exhibits a relentless pursuit of education and personal growth, ultimately breaking away from her family's cycle of poverty. And her determination to escape the limitations imposed by her upbringing is a driving force throughout the memoir. I think this is particularly shown when she decides to go to college. She decides to get more education and do something with it. She decides to follow Lori to New York when she was just 17 years old in order to do better and to find better, something that her parents were not able to do. I think another person who embodies as literally the definition of determination was Lori, who, as the quote-unquote parent, had to take care of everyone and still found a way to succeed individually. I think it's great, and I think determination is really what keeps a lot of families who live in poverty going, that determination to keep going, that determination to get out of this cycle of poverty. It's a strong feeling that everyone needs to have at some point. And finally, I think the narrative also like underscores the complexities of breaking the cycle of poverty. We know that Rex, so Jeanette's father, he also came from like a very vulnerable and poor background. His family never came from money. It was actually Rosemary, Jeanette's mom, who came from money. And I think while personal resilience and determination play crucial roles, the book highlights the systematic challenges that perpetuate poverty, and the Walls family grapples not only with their own internal struggles, but also with societal barriers, so like limited access to education, unstable employment opportunities, and a lack of support systems. I think support systems is like the major circumstance and like societal barrier that's put to people who live in poor conditions and live in poverty. They don't have stable support systems, and this kind of like makes it impossible. It stops them from being able to break from the cycle and getting like the resources they need in order to get away from poverty, and like that hinders their efforts to transcend their circumstances. And finally, the last thing that I think impressed me the most about the book was Jeanette's emphasis on personal responsibility when it came to living in poverty. She acknowledges that a lot of things that they had to go through, like in their specific case, was not necessary had her parents accepted government help and not opposed to it because it made them feel like charity. And she also mentions how her mom could have sold her land in Texas that was worth around $1 million, or even the fact that her parents chose to be homeless when they got to New York. And even her mom, when they're in New York and it was a heavy winter, she was crying and saying that she hated being homeless, she didn't like it, that it was hard, but she still chose to get back out there and stay homeless, even when her children told her multiple times that she could stay with them. And I think there's also this stigma that people are poor because they choose to. And in the Walls case, I think this could kind of be described as the case. Like, I don't think they chose to be poor, because we hear Rex talking a lot about the glass castle and having a huge house. So I don't think they chose to be poor. And this goes for anyone in any social class, whether you're poor or you're middle class or you're rich. I think it all comes down to how hardworking are you. I think hard work is the most important thing in life. I think it's one of the things that everyone needs to have in their life. And if you're not willing to put in the hard work, you're never going to be rewarded with its benefits. And I think the whole stigma that people are poor because they choose to is a huge problem, and it's tremendously discriminatory, because there are millions and millions and millions of poor people around the world, and none of them choose to be poor. They're born into these circumstances. It just comes down to how hardworking are you gonna be, how determined are you gonna be to get out of this cycle or to keep going. And even if you are not able to get out of this cycle because of the many societal barriers that they are, and the lack of help from governments and different charities, it really comes down like, can you live a happy life with everything you've done? I don't think everything's about money. Money makes you comfortable, money makes you happy, but it really comes down to, are you happy with everything you've done to achieve the things you've achieved? This is not to say that it's easy for everyone. There's a lot of discrimination still as of today in 2023. Unfortunately, there's still a lot of things going on, whether that be race, sex, age. There's a lot of discrimination, and especially I think the book really talks about how Black people at the time were especially being discriminated, and the fact that the Walls family were not discriminated for this because they were white and still chose to not take the few opportunities they were given because of their race, it just kind of shows that they weren't maybe as hardworking. And by family, I don't mean the kids. I think the kids were tremendously hardworking, and they broke this cycle by themselves. They didn't have any help. They only had each other's support. I think the parents could have done more, especially when they saw their children looking through garbage in order to be able to eat. And I think the whole race issue, proof of this is seen when Rex's mother calls Black people the N-word multiple times, and when Jeanette's Black friends had to go to the pool in the morning and white people went during the afternoon. And this was just like an unspoken rule that was tremendously discriminatory, nonetheless. And I think, adding on to that, the Walls never had to face this kind of discrimination and were never denied a job because of this. And in fact, they all got jobs when they applied to them. And I do not people choose to be happy, choose to be poor due to the amounts of poverty there is around the world. But I do think that some people choose to work harder, and even though they may never escape poverty completely, they're able to live a more economically comfortable life, and a more comfortable life in the sense that they will never have to question their dignity and how hardworking they were and their efforts toward their family, life. So overall, I think in supporting the movement of the socioeconomic equality, the Glass Castle serves as a testament in some way to the urgency of addressing systematic issues that perpetuate poverty, such as lack of proper education, affordable housing, and support systems. And I think it provides a narrative that humanizes the struggles faced by those living in poverty and underscores the necessity of comprehensive societal changes to uplift marginalized and oppressed communities. I think in conclusion, the Glass Castle essentially illustrates the complex interaction between an individual's responsibility and their willpower and the resilience and the systematic challenges posed by poverty. It represents a detailed picture of difficulties in overcoming such ingrained circumstances, and it emphasizes the need of both individual action and the need for societal reform to truly break the cycle of poverty. My opinion, my overall view of the book is that it was an amazing book, and I previously mentioned, with my experience of seeing people in the streets and living in a country where unfortunately poverty is a big issue, this book really helped me understand a person's perspective and the true challenges. It really humanized that experience for me, and it made me grateful. I'm grateful I chose to read this book. I truly am, because it gave me a different perspective of how other people see the world. Fortunately, I've been very, very fortunate in life. I've been always given top-notch education. There's always food in my house. I have a house. I've been able to travel, but there's a lot of people who don't. And while I'm grateful for all of this, I think something that really stuck with me that Rex, so Jeanette's father, mentioned towards the start of the book when he was telling his children to pick a star because that was their present, is something he said that people in their situation, people who didn't have a lot of money to support themselves, in some ways gained more than rich people because they were able to see the world in a different perspective. And that's something I've come to appreciate throughout the book, and something that stuck with me throughout my reading of this book, and still I think about it every day, because even though I am grateful for a lot of the materialistic things I've acquired throughout my life, it's also very true that there are some challenges that I'll never face, and that could gain some wisdom, that I could in some ways gain some wisdom and experience with if I'm able to talk or read about people who have been through different situations as I have. Things like I previously mentioned, resilience and determination, that will to want to break a cycle, I think is very important in this case, in the Walls case, their family, but also with many other people who find themselves in similar situations. And I think a lot of this resilience, yes, it was built because maybe they didn't have food, they didn't have a proper stable home, and their parents were a little bit crazy. But I think it also had to do with like wanting to escape the situation as a whole, because even though the Wolves kids were very determined to get out and stuff like that, I think it was like provoked by the environment they were raised in. Like there's multiple times where Jeanette mentions having been touched by different people. Even her own uncle touched her, and her mother just discarded the whole thing. Or even her own father bringing her to a bar and letting a random guy take advantage of her. I think that really built resilience, and it was a way of to build that determination to want to get out, to want to do better. And I feel like that's something we can all learn from, even if we are not living in poverty and in these like vulnerable situation. We can all learn to be resilient in a certain level. Maybe if you don't have a lot of challenges in your life, whether that's in your home life or at school, it's good to have experiences that give you a lesson, that give you wisdom, and that make you work harder for things. So the book was a 10 out of 10. Absolutely loved it. I hope you guys enjoyed the podcast. I'm glad that you stayed this long with me, and I'll see you next week for our next book review.